Hello and welcome to News of Faith podcast, brought to you by Reverend James Wesley from Worldwide Online Ministry. Check us out at worldwideonlineministry.com. To be on this podcast, send an email to rev.jamesw@yahoo.com.
Hello, and welcome to our new episode podcast show that we've just started. This is Reverend James Wesley, and the name of our show is You Talk. And what we would like to do here is just get people together and let them talk, and see what's going on between them. Today, we've got two special guests on here. We have Lindbergh Cornell, who's an author of, and we have Jerry Callison, which is an author also. Now, they kind of know each other a little bit. They've talked before to each other, and they both have two fantastic books out. And we're just going to kind of get together and let them say whatever they want to say. It's not going to be, a real professional job. Like I said, this is a first episode for You Talk, so we're going to see how it goes. And Jerry and Lynn, let me start out with Lynn. Let me ask you. You can bring up this question with Jerry. How about you tell a little bit about yourself there, where you're at, how you got started into being an author of the book that you've got out. Tell us about the book a little bit, and then I'm going to have Jerry do the same thing, and then we can just jump in at both feet.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I got into writing. My wife, about 10 years ago, probably a little longer than that, had been encouraging me to write. And at the time, I wasn't even considering or thinking of myself as a writer. And but she kept, encouraging me. And so finally, I started thinking about it. And then she signed me up for a writers' conference right here in the Chicago area called Write to Publish. And so the first time I went, that's when the whole world of writing opened up to me. I could kind of see that, people do this for a living. I mean, of course I always knew it, but then that was the first time that I could say, wow, I could do this. And so then I began to, kind of on a journey to, learn how to write. That was kind of the first thing. I had to learn the craft of writing, and that probably took the longest because at the time, even though my wife encouraged me to write, she doesn't write, and she's not a book reader either. So I had to learn how to type. I had to learn. I even went, back to some college courses on English and grammar, and just so that because I had to, started writing myself, and then so the ideas and the stories were there. I had plenty of stories to write, but the craft of writing I didn't have. And so over the next few years, that's kind of where the journey went. I started writing my first novel, The Color of Redemption. Even at that time, I had the story idea, and I just began to write it. But then I also, over the years, as I would learn about the craft of writing, I would go back and make the revisions. So it went through several drafts, mainly the craft part of it. So after about nearly 10 years, I finished the book, The Color of Redemption, and it came out June 30th. So it's out now. And so the book itself, it's dealing with I want to say racism among Christians, but then how do we rectify it from a biblical standpoint? Having grown up, of course, I was born, in 1959, so let's say in 1968 when Martin Luther King was killed, I was only like 8 years old. But being fully aware of the civil rights movement, from a cultural standpoint, as a social justice movement. When I became a Christian, I wanted to see how I began to be aware of what Scripture says, about life and culture. How do we integrate, the Christian walk into, in this case, a social issue, and such as civil rights, and which was kind of interesting because what I find is how God would deal with something. So, like, for example, if I did look at a scripture in the New Testament where Paul and Peter tell slaves to submit to their masters, how do we deal with scriptures like that? How do we approach that? Especially, being so used to the civil rights angle. So, and even the civil rights angle, which is an American angle, the notion of freedom, that freedom becomes the most important sort of quest for every human being. Of course, what I found, in Scripture, freedom is not the most important issue. And so when I would read these scriptures on slavery, where Paul would say, submit to your slave masters, as an African American, that bothered me until I began to understand what God's purpose in that submission was. And so when we kind of go back to the original, command of God for our lives, we're here to show forth the light of Christ. And that light of Christ means that many Christians all over the world and throughout time will be exposed to various situations of their life, their culture, their country, their existence. And in each case, the object there is to shine forth the light of the gospel. So sometimes those life experiences are unpleasant. Sometimes those life experiences are great. Whichever it is, we are to shine forth the light of the gospel. So with that said, that's what the Color of Redemption kind of looked at. So, the central story is here in the 1960s in an Alabama town, there was a white man who murdered an African-American man for no reason other than that he just hated black people. But he did it in front of his family, in front of his wife, so it was kind of a horrific crime. And then 50 years later, their paths cross. And so, unbeknownst to her, he is now a devout Christian. He loves the Lord. He's living for the Lord. So the question becomes, does she forgive him? Does she seek, justice? And so, in her mind, she says, well, there's never a question about it. He's my brother in the Lord. He's demonstrated and proved that he loves the Lord. His life proved that. But then, of course, some of the other family members didn't. So that's kind of what the thought behind the Color of Redemption is. How do we tackle, these issues which are a reality? But as Christians, we should look at these issues from, God's purpose. And so that resolution then, sometimes, like I say, it's not always the most easiest solution or the most pleasant experience. But, if you think about this, for example, just if we kind of go back, let's say, 150 years, 160 years, and this is some of the thoughts that I ran through in my mind. But if we go back 160 years, and let's say I would have been a slave, and if I was a slave, knowing what I know today, so then how would my life be? Now, if I contrast that, for example, with a very well-known slave uprising led by Nat Turner, which resulted, of course, in his death and the death of a lot of other slaves, because he tried to, overthrow slavery and liberate the slaves, and ended badly. But let's say now, if I'm in the same time period, and I'm saying, well, Lord, what is your purpose for me? I could hate my life, I could hate my existence, I could hate, my slave master. But understanding the scriptures, then I would, come to the conclusion God, would have me here to show forth my life, to show forth God's light. And of course, that's a very hard point for people to understand. So instead of saying, Lord, deliver me from my slave master, maybe God wants me there so that I could be that light for my slave master. So imagine the slave master, instead of hearing me curse him, he hears me praying for him. And what better way, if you think about during the same period of time when you would have had, let's say, people like George Whitefield, who, had thousands come to his meetings. He had the Wesleys, who had thousands of people come to their meetings. But yet, I could have reached my slave master with my Christian life on my plantation, on the plantation that I lived on, and so we multiply that with the gospel, with the body of Christ, if you kind of think about that thought that we can, that each member of the body of Christ can go where no famous evangelist can go. When we think about the success of Billy Graham's, crusade, he, like here in the Chicago area, I think the Soldier Field is one of the largest venues, some 80,000 people, I think, that it can hold. But that's only 80,000 people in a city of 2 million, in a metropolitan area of 8 or 9 million. So if I think about, this is the kind of point, because me and Jerry, we live like almost 50 miles from each other. So Jerry can reach people in Aurora that Billy Graham could never reach by his life. I can reach people here in the south suburbs where I live at, with my life, that Billy Graham would never come to this, my city. So with that thought, that's what I'm saying, with that thought, that's how we're thinking, my thought in terms of how we as believers can reach people. And it's just, that's how, so when God says, in scriptures, slaves, submit to your master, it has nothing to do with culture, it has nothing to do with employment, it has nothing to do with, in terms of the way of life. It has everything to do with his purpose, to say, this is where you are, this is who you can reach. This is who you can reach. Yeah. With your life. Yeah. So,
yeah.
Your life is yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way you put that and the way you wrote that book and everything. Yeah, it's Jerry. Wow. I know that the way that you was writing was in a little different format, but let's hear a little bit about you there and see. And then when we get done there, I'm sure you guys might have some questions to ask each other about how you go about getting information for writing and stuff. But I want to hear from Jerry now and see what he's got to say about his book that Stranded at Romson's Lodge and how it all began.
Well, before I get to Stranded and me, I've got to tag on to what Lynn just said. And, brother, what you were just talking about, the hair went up on my arm, because you're talking about that I have people to reach here in Aurora. You have people to reach there in the south suburbs. But God has given us the vehicle of writing, and we can reach people around the world and not leave our home.
Yes.
And that is, to me, such an amazing concept. And you being black, African American, me being white with Irish and English, and I don't know of anything else, but whatever, it really doesn't matter. There's only one race. We look at things as being multiracial, but God only created one. And through time and through changes, what we call races came about, but there were family groups that split off, and as they did, I've got a new granddaughter, and my dad always hoped that one of us kids would be redheaded, and none of us were. And I kind of hoped that one of my kids would be redheaded, and none of them were. His grandfather was. All right. So he was hoping that would come through. But, my daughter posted a picture of our great-granddaughter, my granddaughter, just a few days ago, and talking about it looks like she's going to have red hair. Yeah, I'm excited about that. But, things like that have changed. Well, okay, so the idea of us hating each other because of the color of our skin is just as ridiculous as if we hate each other because of the color of our hair. God placed different people in different parts of the world and gave them different characteristics to protect them, and to the melanin in the skin is there to protect us from the sun, or those of us that come from the northern climes, we don't have as much melanin in the skin because our skin needs to absorb the sunlight to create vitamin D. And God provided that for us. Scientists or so-called scientists want to call that evolution. I don't see that as evolution. I see that as design. And God put that into place. So if God created us as one race and then gave us different characteristics, we ought to hate each other because of what God did? That doesn't make sense to me, but that's what life is. And I don't think from a black perspective, and I don't understand things from a black perspective. I'm trying to learn them, and I'm grateful to have a brother here that is writing from that perspective for my education and edification. And along with that, to reach people with the redemption and what redemption really does for us. In that, it could take two totally disparate people like Lynn and myself and make us brothers and make us love each other. And, so thanks, brother. I still got hair up on my arm. I'm thinking about what God has allowed here for us to do, because you started writing about 10 years ago. I started 3.5 years ago. Well, I haven't learned the craft. I just started telling a story, and I tell people all the time that I took English for a foreign language. I actually flunked the composition part of English when I was in college and had to take it over again. And here God made me a writer. He's got a sense of humor. But the open door and the opportunity that God gave me, something I always wanted to do but didn't think I could do, didn't really have time to try until I got sick and was disabled 3.5 years ago, well, 3 3/4 now. And I sat down and just started putting down ideas on a story and telling a story. And mine is different. Lynn has a social redemption in his story, where mine is more of a demonstration of what Christianity as it ought to be lived is. The story of 2 high school seniors who were kidnapped, blown up to upstate Maine, which is the most remote area in the United States with less than one person per 100 square miles. And they get dropped off at a lodge by their kidnapper, who, on takeoff, hits a goose and crashes, leaving them stranded at Romson's Lodge, which is the title of the book. My concept in going into this was countercultural, in that, the common theme of coming-of-age books is a guy and a girl get stranded someplace or another. They're in a remote location where nobody else knows what's going on. And I think of Joseph when he was sold into slavery by his brothers and ends up in Egypt where nobody else knows what's going on. And Potiphar's wife tries to entice him, but he knows that God knows. And Joseph says to her, "How can I do this great sin against your husband and against God?" Nobody else knows. His father thinks he's dead. His brothers have no idea and don't care. Nobody else knows. So what could, he could do anything he wanted to do, but he understands that God knows, and he understands that God cares, and he understands that he has an obligation to his master. And that could get into the slavery issue from a totally different angle, but I don't want to chase that rabbit trail right now, maybe another time. But he recognizes his responsibility on two levels. First of all, to his God, and then to his master, not to take something that doesn't belong to him. Well, in my story with Jed and Elizabeth, they're up there in remote Maine. They have no idea if they will even survive, or at least Elizabeth doesn't. Jed knows that he can survive and that they can make it, even if nobody ever finds them. They can make it, barring accident or severe illness. But they're in a position nobody knows. If they decide they want to fool around, nobody knows. Nobody would ever know. But they recognize that they have a responsibility to God and that God knows. So they, being in that position, resist temptation, and they try to live as much as a Christian as they possibly can. And the story, also deals with the parents and how they deal with things. Elizabeth's father is widowed. Elizabeth's mother had died 3 years previously of cancer, and she's the only thing he has left. And when she's gone, he has a panic attack. And a Christian nurse in the hospital whose ex-husband had kidnapped her son is able to help Charles, Elizabeth's father, deal with the loss and deal with the uncertainty of whether or not he's going to get his daughter back. And in that, there is a recognition of need on Charles's part, and a romance blooms. Jed's parents, on the other hand, he's also an only child, and they have each other, but then they start struggling because the mother doesn't feel like the father understands her loss, and he doesn't feel like she understands his, and they kind of go at cross purposes and end up talking with the pastor and getting some counsel on grief and loss. And the mother finds comfort in the Psalms, where she goes and reads of David when he is in some really deep times and hard times. So I tried all throughout the book to demonstrate what Christianity is, what Christian reactions and responses ought to be. And while I was doing it, I tried to tell a good story that was entertaining. Just about everybody that's read it has found it to be so. But I didn't have an overt Christian message in there, other than demonstrating what Christianity is. And I appreciate what Lynn has done with his, in that he's got more than just the social aspect of dealing with the racial tensions and issues, but he also has the gospel in there, what God's purpose is in that. And sometimes I wish I had done a little bit more, but this is the angle I felt like God wanted me to go with this story.
That's what you need to do. You can't go against God's work, and so when you feel that this is what God wanted you to do, you're putting that out there for Him to direct people to your book, for people that need to read it and understand, that there's a lot of things that goes on out there in life, whether they're teenagers or young adults, that there are some good people out there that will leave this temptation alone and survive. That was the biggest part of the book, was they was overseeing or underseeing the temptation, but they were surviving, and they seemed like they come out. Of course, I read the book, but they came out a lot better than what they went in, because when they first went into that lodge, they was both probably scared and wondered what will happen to them, because it's such a remote place and that. But they both kept God first, and He seen them through it. And that's it. It was an awesome book.
I think it's in chapter 7, off the top of my head, when the first Sunday came up that they were there. And Jed said, "We're not going to work today. We're not going to do anything else today. We're going to keep today separate. And we're going to use this day. We don't have a church. We don't have a preacher. We don't have anything else. But we're going to use today to focus on God." And that set the tone for the rest of the book. Now, that's the only time that's mentioned in there. But that set the tone in their relationship and what they're doing. That Sunday, they're going to set aside as a quiet day, a day that they're going to have extra time in the Scriptures, and a day that they're going to, work together and talk together on these sorts of things. And again, it was trying to set an example. Now, we don't set the day Sunday aside as much as probably we ought. Definitely not as much as we did when I was a kid. But I wanted in there to set aside a distinction. And so I tried to do that. My purpose was to get people to ask questions. Why would you do this? Why would they do that? And then let people think about it, and then see what God does with that.
Now, would they be giving it away here? Now, people that are listening, they're going to be thinking that maybe they were there for a week, maybe 2 weeks. Would it be giving it away if you told us how long they were actually there?
They were there for 9 months.
Right. That's a long time.
Well, just about 9 months. It was, I guess not quite. I guess it would have been 7 months, because they were kidnapped in May, the end of the school year, and they are rescued at the end of December. So I guess that's more 7 months than it is 9.
Yeah, that's just like, saying, a week or two, people could probably see, that they were being true with God. But now you go talking about 7 months, that does take a little more willpower, and they used that willpower.
Well, and it's a guy and a girl having to live in the same, it's basically a one-room cabin. That she has a curtain separating her area, but other than that, it's basically just an open cabin. It was originally a logging cabin, for a logging crew to live in. So it's very rough, very Spartan, And Lizzie, being a city girl, never being away from electricity, never being away from anything at home, that was a major change for her, and she had to do a lot of adapting. Whereas Jed, he was he grew up in the city, but he grew up doing a lot of hunting, doing a lot of fishing, being out in the woods, and he had good training from his father, so he was able to cope with that sort of thing. But the problem is one person trying to cope and take care of two persons by himself needs some help, and Lizzie had to step up and learn how to do it, even though she didn't want to, even though she didn't like to, and even though she was frightened. And she had to do some serious growing during that time.
I'd say when they got through and they got back, I don't want to give it away again. I'm sure at the end of this book she would make someone a very good wife, for what she had went through and learned in that time. So Lynn, do you have anything? You got any questions with Jerry?
No, I just wanted to add that I think the book gives a good alternative, because in our world today, people would find it hard to believe that he could resist like that he could not, but especially when we're shown how easily it is to succumb. And there was a movie I think that came out in I'm guessing the 80s, where you had a situation where there were two kids that kind of were stranded on an island, and they grew up sort of, and they grew into, kind of a sexual situation as well. But that was, of course, from a world standpoint. So I think, even though sometimes it's, people will look at the Christian, life and the Christian concept as corny and out of touch. But no, we could we could live lives that are pleasing to the Lord. Not perfect, but we could if we got our mind set on God, we could resist, and we could live lives that are pleasing to the Lord.
All right, I believe that.
I think you're talking about the movie Blue Lagoon. Came out, I think,
yes,
in '82. I'm not positive on that, but it was real popular, and it was talked about a lot. And everybody talked about Brooke Shields and all that went on in the movie, and hearing people talking about the movie without me going to see it. But everybody talking about it and talking about all that happened is the genesis of Stranded. Because, I heard people talking about that, and I kept thinking, what if? What if two Christian kids were in that situation? What would they do? What if two Christian kids were stuck and stranded where they think they're not going to be rescued, but what are they going to do? Will they live their values, or will they succumb? And I had a good friend of mine from up here, a business acquaintance. I was telling him about the book before it came out, and he says, "Yeah, I know it's fiction now." When I told him what the storyline was about, two kids being stranded like that, and but yet remaining pure. He said, "Yeah, I know that's fiction now." Well, No, he doesn't know, because the man isn't a Christian. He doesn't know the Lord. He doesn't understand the concept. He just knows what is common, and what people think is what happens in the world. And it's interesting that we have the idea that the kids are all, quote, doing it, end quote, but yet a tremendous percentage of even non-Christian kids are not, involved in sexual activity. But the common theme in media and the common theme in entertainment is, they're putting it out there, and just like they're pushing the homosexual agenda and the transgender agenda now so heavily, to make it look like everybody is doing it. Well, everybody isn't doing it. And especially Christians need to understand that everybody isn't doing it, and you can live differently. You can live a pure, holy life. You can live the way God designed us to live. And that was my purpose in telling the story. Like I said, I wanted to make it a fun story, but yet I wanted to demonstrate this.
Yeah, that's and then being that both of you are Christians, writing books and things, this is where I come from, the idea to run a podcast on Christian authors, because there's a lot of Christian people out there that have given up reading books because there's nothing good out there anymore. And I wanted them to see that there are good books out there that the whole family can read and be entertained with, without all this other garbage in it. And since I've been doing this podcast, I've had several Christian authors on the podcast on News of Faith. As my other podcast, and I was surprised, that people were coming in left and right with their stories, their interviews, their reasoning behind the way they write their books as a Christian perspective, and that's what I'm wanting to try to get out there for people, is that don't give up reading books, because there's some good ones out there, and that I'm trying to let them know where they can find these kind of books, because myself, I don't really read much. I'm reading these books that people are sending me, but as far as going in somewhere and you look at a book, you look at the cover, it looks like a good book, and the first 2 pages, you want to put it down and walk away from it. So it's hard to find something good like that anymore, and I appreciate the way y'all handle the situations and in your writings and stuff, to let people know that there are some good people out there, like you said, Christians or non-Christian people even. And you was mentioning the fact that the one guy said that he knew that was a fiction. Well, you know what? If you didn't know, if it wasn't listed on the back of the book or anything else, you start reading that book and you would think that was a true story. I mean, it all fell into place so easy with all the things going on there. I wouldn't have known the difference. And the same way with Lynn. Lynn's book is you're not getting into a fictional thing. I mean, you're taking stories from backgrounds of other people. And I think you said you came up with a lot of that writing from Alabama, was it?
Can you say it again?
Yeah. Did you say that did a lot of your writing in that book came from inspirations, or I guess you'd call it, from family and things down in Alabama? Was it Alabama?
No. The story was it was fiction. It was really just kind of made up. And in fact, there's a town. I had to change some things because I started. The story starts off with in a small town about an hour kind of north of Birmingham, and the original name was Springfield, Alabama. And I found out that there was actually a Springfield, Alabama, that was just a little north of Birmingham. So I had to change that. But some of the story, it was really kind of it was a fiction story. Some of the later stories, the later part of the book, probably was more of some of the experiences that that I experienced, in churches. Kind of around here in the Chicago area, some of the attitudes that I found that still sort of kind of prevailed. So the latter part of the book is probably more, from that. The story from 1960 is, I just wanted to have something to kind of springboard from, that. But my point was, he was a man who had a horrific past, but Christ had forgiven him. Christ had changed him. And and mainly to see how this, plays out in the present, in the present, as we come to the present. The story of forgiveness and redemption.
Right.
I would say one thing, piggybacking on back with Jerry too, when the guy said it was, he knew it was fiction. Of course, his statement is very relative, because as you know, even in this day, there are a lot of stories, whether Christian or not, where people are not as sexually active and as loose as they are. So I think the fact that and we could really thank the Christian heritage of our nation, the influence for that. I think it's changing, but I think that, like I say, I think we could have an unabashed, and that's what I kind of like about Jerry's story, that you have you don't have to be ashamed of, saying I'm going to stand up for Christian principles, I'm going to live a certain way, when people kind of scoff at it today, and they do, but that, to me, that's also it comes from their experience, which I don't, which is not always representative, even of non-Christians,
That's always been, though, people scarfing people up, even back in the Old Testament, when Paul was going from one town to another, preaching the Word of God. A lot of people, there were groups there that was there to listen and to accept what he was saying, and then there was groups there that was mocking him and trying to kill him for what he was saying, because they,
right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's always been that way, and I don't think it's ever going to stop. It's just the idea that it's more like you have to know what's going on to understand it.
Well, I think one thing that Lynn and I both did in our writing styles is neither of us tried to have a stereotypical, quote, Christian, end quote, book. We tried to tell a story that has Christianity all through it, but yet we didn't try to make it one of these perfect little Christian stories that, I don't know, but I grew up on, where everything is just right. I mean, the main character may have had some character flaws and things like that, but yet that it was just I don't know, too cookie cutter-ish. And I've been told to a degree that Jed is too perfect. Well, maybe I did make him a little bit too perfect, but I kind of had a person in mind that I patterned Jed after, and I don't think he would recognize himself there, because I had a couple other people that I also included in his character, but very much, Jed would have fit very well in this guy's skin, so maybe he was too perfect of a character, but he was a pretty good representation of the guy that I had in mind. And people are like Jed. Now, most, no.
And I think it's
probably not, even in the churches.
Right. And, Jerry, if you also consider the location, too. You know, I think if you also consider the location, it was a perfect fit for the location. You know, I mean, if you'd written the story, if you'd written the story, you know, in, let's say, Appalachian, it would be a different flavor to it. You would have to write it a different flavor. But if you know, I think the location was just right for it. You know, I thought it was a perfect fit for the. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, if I had an inner city kid that was put into that position, he might be able to function well in downtown Chicago, or he might be able to, or inner city Chicago, or the inner suburbs. He might have been able to function there and might have street smarts and everything else, but I had to have somebody that knew how to handle an M1 rifle, and somebody that knew how to skin out a deer, and somebody that knew how to make buckskin out of the deer hide. And I'm not going to tell you what that was for.
Correct.
But, I had to have somebody that knew that. But I countered that on the other hand with Elizabeth, who knew none of it. He had to teach her how to light a wood stove. And, so, yeah, the character was perfect for what he was doing. But then, I did have one lady that criticized that he was just too perfect in his attitude and everything else. But then I had others that criticized that I had the girl so imperfect, and they thought that she should have been a little bit stronger and everything else. But you can't please everybody. Yeah, so you make the story the best you can, and try and make it entertaining, but at the same time, you don't lose sight of your purpose in telling the story. The purpose is to represent Jesus Christ. Brother James, we need to sick Charlie and went blank. I know better than that. Charlie Huff and his Cindy on you and get you to interview them. They're Cindy is the president of the local Word Weavers chapter that we are in, and that's where I got to know Lynn, and they write two totally different styles, and I think that'd be good for you, because their purpose too is to represent Jesus Christ.
Well, Jerry, I told you that one time, send me whoever you wanted to send to me, and then I made this little remark. I made this little remark one day that I didn't have time to do anything because somebody keeps sending all these people to me, but that was a joke. I was just joking with you. I'm grateful that you can send people to me. I really am. There's a couple that I kind of marked off the list as I got to learn a little bit about them, but they're you can't have everybody on there. It's just not the way I run the podcast, but
sure. Not everybody's going to fit what you need.
Right. I talked to one person. I don't know. I guess about the first 5 minutes, he threw some words in there that I was afraid to put him on there because he'd be throwing them out there too, But it's just yeah, and
that was somebody I sent you.
Yeah, we talk about that later.
Oh yeah, well, we need to. Because I need to address that. I don't like to send that kind to you.
Yeah, but it was there's a couple that I had a couple reasons why not to put them on, and I'll tell you about it later.
Yeah.
But you just keep sending them. I appreciate it because that helps me keep this podcast going on a weekly basis, and that's what I was trying to do, at least one a week, and get just so many different styles of book writing that people need to understand and hear about them because they don't know they're out there.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, the reason I mentioned Charlie and Cindy is because Word Weavers International is a Christian writers organization, and I am just so thrilled to be a part of that. I'm learning in there. We meet, once a month, and we each take in a writing sample that then we share with the group, and it gets critiqued. And I said earlier that Lynn started learning the craft. Well, I just started telling the story. I don't know the craft, and I need to. Mm-hmm. So when I go in there, and by the time they get done, I feel like I'm back in first grade trying to figure out how to spell my name. But I'm so grateful for it, because I'm learning better ways to present the story and better ways to write it and get it across. And things that I overdo and things that I underdo. So, anybody that's interested in learning to write, or anybody that thinks they might like to write, Word Weavers International would be a wonderful, wonderful place for them to start. Even if there isn't a local chapter for them to be part of, there are online groups where they can do the critiquing online and can develop their craft and develop their abilities and learn how best to get the message across. Because, like you were saying earlier, there is such a paucity of good Christian, literature out there. We just don't find it. And so much of it that we find is not good. And it's a reason that people neglect the Christian genre in a lot of areas, because the writing just isn't good. We haven't focused on developing good Christian writers. And I think the church has lost an opportunity there. So what do you think, Lynn?
Personally, if they want to, I suggest, like all writers who want to be published, authors, that to first learn the craft of writing, because usually the stories are there for a writer. Word Weavers is a good venue, because what you have is people looking at your writing, and they're critiquing your writing. And sometimes as a writer, you get in a bubble where you don't see what people are seeing in terms of when they're reading. Mm-hmm. And so that's good. And as you mentioned, Cindy and Charles Huff, Cindy's a very good writer, and she will point out things. There are things even with the Color of Redemption a lot of times that because she read part of that. I would take different parts of that and have them critique it and stuff, and so she's very good at that. And so if a person, they can go online for Word Weavers, especially down where you at, Brother Wesley, in Florida. They're all over Florida. You can almost accidentally you can run into a Word Weavers group down there, but they're all over the nation, and you probably can go on the website and probably and find the location. But and then as Jerry said too, if not, there's a lot of online critique groups and stuff, and other writing groups as well that you can get into critique. In terms of critiquing the group, there's also a lot of online resources too for learning the craft. Because I think one of the good things that that I like in any writing, whether it's Christian or non-Christian, you tell a good human story, and so ours happen to be Christian, and so if you tell a good story, people will be interested in that. You're going to captivate your audience by telling a good human story, because they're going to get involved with the characters. Right. So I think what happens so many times is we want, as Christian writers, and even Christian, I can say Christian storytellers, because we see a lot of it in Christian movies. like you stated, you see that they try to present, a message rather than a story, and to have a good story, right. The message is in the story, and so like I say, if everything is always cheerful, if everything is always just bubbly and all that, with no conflict, with no there's no so the conflict of the story, it becomes the essence of it, and even in the Bible, you think about how this, you read through the Old Testament, which is great storytelling, and how with David, he was the greatest king of Israel, and look how flawed he was, and so here you see God giving us the conflict in him, giving us a good story, but also we see a flawed character, but yet God says, this is my man. So as we tell stories, I think we can kind of look at it and say, make sure that we're telling good stories, the good as well as sometimes the bad.
Well, I don't want to leave you left out there, Lynn. If you know of anybody, I've always say that a good author is a good talker, and people out there they're always wanting a way to promote their books, and let people know what kind of novels or whatever they're writing. And if you could send them my way, I'd appreciate it. And that gives them the opportunity to get more people to hear about their book. So, yeah, it's no burden on me to have them on the show, because that helps them out a whole lot. And I've been getting a lot of response back. A lot of listeners coming in and hearing these podcasts. So, yeah, you got my phone number there. You can just throw them that phone number, or give them my website on Facebook or page or whatever, and let them get a hold of me, because I don't know who they are, so they have to come to me.
Yes. Oh yes, I will.
Well, we do.
Going back to the writers group. Pardon?
No, go ahead.
Going back to the writers groups for just a moment. There is a Word Weavers, and there's Word Weavers International. Word Weavers International is the one that I'm referring people to. The other one is not a Christian organization. I don't really know that much about it, but it's not what I would want to recommend. Word Weavers International is for Christian
I didn't know.
writers and Christian authors. Yeah. So when if you Google it or look it up, make sure that you're looking for the international. And I'm a part of a secular writing group at a local library, and I learn a lot there, and I have a lot of value. And I recommend that writers do that sort of thing too. But I love the Word Weavers International because it comes from a Christian viewpoint and a Christian purpose in what it's doing. And I think that's very important for us, that we focus on learning to write, and we focus on developing our craft, but we also have a purpose in mind. And that purpose needs to be more than just selling books. And it needs to be more than just telling stories. It needs to be representing Jesus Christ. And Lynn just mentioned, reading in the Old Testament, and you read about flawed characters like David. He was a very flawed character, but yet the redemption is there. And that's the difference between a Christian story that is done right. Is yes, you have the flawed characters, and you have wrong, and you have wrongdoing, but you have redemption. And you don't find that in secular writing. They may come out of it, and they may overcome whatever it is that they've been doing wrong, but you don't have the redemptive value that Jesus Christ gives. And that's what I wanted. Even though it's not out in the open in Stranded at Romson's Lodge, I wanted to have that redemptive value demonstrated in the characters. And I'll shut up and let you do what you need to do.
Jerry, we enjoy. I'm sure the listeners are enjoying both of you talking because you guys have got it together. You know, you got everything that you're doing is for the good and for the people out there that need this, and they need to hear this. And I'm very interested in listening to both of you there. So carry on.
Well,
what have you got going on, man?
I think. Well, actually, I'd finished my second novel, the rough draft of the second novel, and so I'll be tweaking that, and then I'm about 75% through with my third novel.
Excellent.
So my third novel it's called In God's Honor, and it's about an Iranian secret police woman who comes to faith, and she's a devout. She starts off as a devout Muslim, and she's very, very zealous, for Islam, to the point where she's persecuting Christians, trying to destroy the underground church in Iran. And but she comes to faith because there's one question that the person that she's torturing is a lady that she's torturing who was help getting young Christian women out of Iran. But she asked in one of the interrogations, she asked her one question. She says, "Does Allah love you?" And the question kind of stuns her, and her response is, "Well, yeah, as long as we obey him." She says, "I'm keeping the, I'm obeying the Quran. I'm being a good Muslim. I pray 5 times a day." She said, "But does Allah love you? That's you loving Allah. That's you trying to please him. But does Allah love you?" And so at that point, it kind of turns her insides out because she's wondered why was an Iranian turned to Christianity. And so this lady tells her it's because what I discovered is that God loves me. And so that sends her on a journey. She comes to faith. So that's kind of what I'm working on now, and in God's honor. So it was interesting. I had to do a lot of research on Iranian culture, which was I was surprised because of what we see through the media. Iran is it has there's a lot of contention in Iran between the religious leaders and then the secular culture. The secular culture is just like any other Western culture. They're vain, they're into, life. They're not religious. So there's a tension between the two groups in Iran. The religious leaders rule Iran, and thus that's the part that we kind of see. But the other part of it is, you have Iranians who into very much into their life, their sinful life. Everything that we see, that our ears hear, they have over there. So that was interesting, kind of finding out. And so, it was, but actually she comes to faith and has to flee Iran. And so she sort of lives here. She ends up living in Texas and becomes the pastor's wife. And then, she has to adjust her life here from Iran because she was, she was very much feared in Iran because she was very tough. She was given a wide, longitude in which to hunt down Christians. So and when she became a Christian, then she had to leave because, and then of course we get into sort of some of the the honor killings, because she has conflict with her own family, which later she would deal with in the book. So that's kind of what I'm, like I said, I'm about 75% through that one, almost done with the rough draft on that one.
Jerry, what what is it with you guys? You just start a book here and then start one there, and next thing you know, you got 2 or 3 going. But Jerry, don't you have one that you've started already, or you got one in mind? You said something about that one day. What kind of a book is it that you're doing next? Was that the love story or whatever?
I've got several things going, kind of like you say, we get these ideas and we'll be working on something and this other idea hits, so we start scribbling notes and start putting stuff down. I've got about 5 of them started.
Does what you're writing in the one book say, they don't go here, that goes in this book? Do you kind of catch yourself doing that?
I've done that. I've done that.
Yet, but
I have. I've done that, and I've had. That's why when you go back and reread it, you go, wait a minute, wrong book, wrong character.
All right. Tell us about this next book, Jerry.
I'm in a parallel universe here.
Tell us about your next book, Jerry. I'm interested in this. You said that your wife was kind of helping you through some of it to get you the ideas of what to say, because you're not exactly into that kind of a book.
Well, no. What I told you was I started a romance, and my wife told me she knows it's my imagination.
Another fiction book.
Yeah, another fiction book, because I don't know what I'm talking about. It's a love story that I'm working on, and like Lynn, I wrote a second one, and it got rejected by publisher, and for good reason. It had several flaws in it because I don't know the craft, and I had some areas in there, and I've got some stuff that needs to be changed. The publisher told me she loves the concept and she loves the direction it's going, but I need to fix some stuff. So I've kind of got that shelved for the moment because I am working on a love story. It's the story of a widower whose wife had the dream of having a bed and breakfast. So when 4 of their 5 daughters were out of the house, they built 10 extra bedrooms onto the house. It's a big old 4-bedroom farmhouse, and they added 10 more rooms so that they could have a big bed and breakfast just out on the outskirts of town, a mid-sized small city. And their youngest daughter is a standout soccer player who's on a full ride scholarship to a major school, but the mother comes down with cancer and dies she's buried on the very day that was supposed to be the grand opening of the bed and breakfast.
Wow.
So the daughter moves back home and enrolls in a local university and plays on their soccer team, but it's just a small school, not even in the Division I NCAA. It's Division III, very small school, where she is totally outclassing everybody else. And as a consequence, her coach the head coach is badly beaten by her husband. So Susanna, the man's daughter, invites her to live at the house while she recuperates and while she and her husband are separated. And there's no love interest there. That is not the thing. But what that does is provides a vehicle for some of the soccer players to start hanging out at the house. The assistant coach, Kat, is the daughter of a preacher in the USSR back years ago who is sent to Siberia for having an unregistered church. She has to move in with, she and her mother have to move in with an uncle who sexually abuses her. She is able to get out of the house finally because her soccer abilities get her onto the Russian team, but she finds that she has to keep undergoing that abuse in order to play from the coaches. And as a consequence, she hates men, and she wants nothing to do with a man in any circumstances whatever. So Kat is the one who drives the head coach over to the house, and when she walks in, Susanna had made her father clean up, shower, shave, because he was, it was the anniversary of her mother's death. He was still in mourning, very much in mourning. He stumbles out, bleary-eyed, red-eyed, puffy-eyed from weeping. He took a shower and shaved, but he just threw on a pair of rumpled pants that were hanging on the end of the bed, reached in the closet and grabbed a shirt without paying attention to what it was, didn't match. He throws it on and buttons it up, doesn't pay attention. He has it buttoned wrong, off center. And he stumbles out wearing a pair of tennis shoes without bothering to tie them, no socks. And his hair's all rumpled because he doesn't bother to even do anything more than run his fingers through it. And when the assistant coach, Kat, comes in and sees him, she tells him that if he so much as lays a finger on Helen, the head coach, she'll claw his eyes out. She says, "I don't care if you are drunk. That's no excuse." And the man does not drink. He is a Christian, and he doesn't drink. And he kicks her out of the house. She's assuming that he's just hung over and coming off of an all-night jag. So that is the beginning of their relationship. Kat's name is Katerina. She's Russian, and she just gets called Kat. But later on, there will be a number of things that will play into this that will require Kat to start, spending time at the house. And then some things will happen that she and Mikhail will end up with coming to realize that God put their paths together. And Kat will be Katerina to Mikhail because he feels it's a softer name, and Kat is demonstrating a harder, more aggressive condition than what Katerina actually is. That's a persona that she has taken on for self-protection. And this one it's dealing with spouse abuse for one thing, and then it's dealing with sexual abuse for another one. I excuse me. I try to have a purpose in my stories. Even in telling the stories, and this one is definitely going to be from a Christian standpoint, and will have the gospel in it at one level or another, and will have Christian references all through it. But I'm getting some help on this from a local shelter for abused women, and it's giving me an opportunity to try to have a testimony with the director and with the counselor that deals with sexual abuse. So I'm trying to understand where I'm coming from on that, and then have the love story play out between Mikhail and Katerina, and develop that. But at the same time, I want to expose some of the issues that get ignored, and particularly get ignored in the church. We don't want to go there. You know, that's dirty, that's nasty, that's bad. We don't want to talk about it, and I think we need to. Much like Lynn is talking about the racial tensions that do not belong in the church, but we don't want to talk about it. I think it's something that needs to be addressed, and something that needs to be talked about, because a lot of this happens within the church community, and it just gets kind of swept under the rug. And so I want to bring that out and do it in a way that is a good story. It's not heavy. It's going to be an entertaining story, I think, and we'll see where it goes. But that's what I've got going on.
You know that he's talking about that needs to be brought out and things. That Arthur June Lewis, you know her, mm-hmm. and there's some
right.
things that she's doing on some of her podcasts that I've been starting to put some on WOTGradio.com, that old time
right.
gospel music station, and I'm listening to each one of these episodes, and I'm saying to myself, is this something that people will listen to? Because what she has got to say, what they do in their little conference calls, is different people call in and discuss things. And they're not debating.
Mm-hmm.
And it all comes from the Bible's point of view. But, they're the people that need to hear these things. And if they don't want to listen to it, they can shut it off. But they're just an average, normal people out there talking about how they deal with, like that one podcast, how do you handle your toddlers, another one, how do you handle drug addiction, how do you do this and that. But it's people, real life, and there's nothing non-biblical about it. They all refer back to the Bible during this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's nice to people can actually listen and, like you guys, read about things that needs to be addressed and things that need to be opened up into the world, because this is not a fairy tale that we're living in. This is real life. And the only way people is going to understand and see what's going on is if somebody tells it.
Well, for many years, the Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago has had the Unshackled radio program, in which each week they tell somebody's story. And you see, we all have our own stories. And we all have our own experience. We all have our own background. We all have our own viewpoint, the way we look at different issues because of our cultural upbringing, because of our life experiences. And I think it's very important that we, as Christians, expose these things, either good or bad. Expose the negatives, because, again, the redemptive value, that I mentioned a while ago, that is in Christianity, what it is that Jesus Christ has done for us, he redeems us from all of that stuff. My story is different than yours, which is different than Lynn's, which is different than June's, which is different than anybody else's. But you see, God has put each of us and has put that story in us. And as we live life, we see other people's stories. And we can sit down and with our fingers on a keyboard, we could tell somebody else's story. Now, we could change it, to protect the guilty or to protect the innocent or protect whoever we need to. But we put the story out there so that somebody else then can understand and see the redemptive value that Jesus Christ has.
Right.
And I think that's what our purpose in life needs to be.
Right. Yeah, you was right. Everybody has their own way of telling what they're talking about, what they're writing about. And like I started out on my podcast, I was just giving testimonies every week. I'd give one of my testimonies. Well, that's just one thing coming from one person. They all was different, but it's the same thing over and over. I'm just giving testimonies of me. And so what I thought, people need to hear what other people's testimonies are, what other people is writing about, what other people has on their podcast. It gives them a variety, and then they can say, well, wow, this is happening to everybody, and then everybody's a little different. So why can't I change my life around? Why can't I see it in a better way? So it's awesome. And like I was talking earlier about the technology on computers and stuff. When I post this, I don't have any idea how many people listen to it except through Spreaker.com, and I see a good numbers, jumping up on that. But I posted on Twitter, and I've got over 224. Not 220. Over 2,400. No, that ain't right. Over 2,204 listeners. There you go. Okay. Over 2,200 listeners are followers on Twitter that get these messages every time I post it. How many of those people did it reach that needed to be reached? I don't know, but if only one person a week is reached through these podcasts, we've done something for that's the Lord's work. That's His job. His job. Our job is to do what He has us to do, and then it's His job to bring people to it. Because I can't go out there and call people, like in Naples. I can't call everybody in Naples and say, hey, listen to this. But God can bring all them people to the podcast to listen to it. So there you go.
Yes.
Okay. You say you got 200 and some odd listeners. Well, how many of them are you reaching with each one?
2,000.
That's not your responsibility.
Right. 2,200 and
okay.
something.
Well,
yeah.
2,000. Okay. Oh, yeah, 2,200. Okay. So that's 2,200. Well, it's not our responsibility how many of those we are reaching. But if we reach one out of that 2,200, and one person catches on to what it is that God has for him, let me ask you another philosophical question. How many apples in a seed?
How many apples in a seed? Wow. Many.
Yeah. A lot of times we think, well, how many seeds are in an apple? But the big thing is how many apples in a seed?
Yeah.
Jesus talked about the parable of the sower, and he's out there sowing. Some of the stuff the birds ate. Some of the stuff fell on rough, stony ground. Some of the stuff grew up but didn't have any depth, and it died. Some of it gave 30, 60, and 100-fold.
Right.
Okay, how many apples in a seed? You plant one seed, one apple seed, and you get a tree. How many apples are on that tree? How many seeds are in those apples? How many years does that tree continue to produce more apples, to produce more seeds?
And also, you got to look at too.
How many apples?
How many seeds from all that production is thrown away because people eat the apple and throw the seeds away? I mean, it could it could more than 1,000-fold if people would take the seeds and replant them. But we're wasteful on things like that, you know. You eat anything that you eat that's got seeds in it, you end up throwing the seeds away. Well, then you got to go to the store and buy more.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what God intended, you know. You could start your whole life with all the produce and fruits and stuff that you need to never have to buy it again if you would just replant the seeds. So yeah, that was a good one. How many apples are in a seed? Yeah.
Well, when you think about that, if you go back quite a few years, and I don't have the whole story directly in my mind right now. So I'm going to be going off of the top of my head, and if I get it a little bit wrong, please forgive me, because I'm not able to lay it out directly for you, but I'm going to give you the gist of it. A number of years ago, a guy was going around calling on members of his Sunday school class, and he went to a shoe store where a young man was selling shoes that was in his class, and he led him to the Lord. And God got a hold of that young man, and he went out and started preaching. Well, he started his own Sunday school class and started bringing them in, and he got to the point that he had more coming to a Sunday school class than he could handle, and the church had more coming from his Sunday school class than were in the rest of the church. And they were just, people were getting saved and getting saved and getting saved, and God called him into the ministry. And D.L. Moody started preaching all around the world because one guy went around one seed in a shoe store. But that's not the end of the story, because there was a guy that got saved in his ministry by the name of Mordecai Ham, who was an evangelist primarily in the southeastern part of the United States. And because of Mordecai Ham, there was a young man that got saved under him, and I'm trying to call it Gypsy Smith. Gypsy Smith got saved, and he became an evangelist and traveled all over the place. And as a consequence of Gypsy Smith, another guy got saved. And because that guy got saved and was working in the mountains in North Carolina, a young man named Billy Graham got saved.
All right.
Now tell me, how many apples in that seed? You know, and it's not our responsibility how many of those seeds bear fruit. It's not our responsibility how many of those apples get eaten. That's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to plant the seed.
Right.
Yeah. And you know, and my example there, I know is incorrect, and I may have had a couple of people flip-flopped. I don't know, but you know, there are actually a couple others in that step, and as a consequence of that, people that I know got saved.
Yeah.
You know, people that I'm close to got saved as a consequence of that guy that was calling on members of his Sunday school class in Boston.
Are you having some hair standing up on you too, like I am? I'm getting a lot of this coming from Jerry's story here.
Oh,
Yeah, but that's good, you know, because people don't see things that way. You know, I mean, you got to have an open mind when you go talking about how many apples are in a seed. You know, I mean, I'm thinking, what are you talking about? You know, and I knew you didn't say it wrong. I just didn't know what the answer was.
Well, see, that's the thing. We think, well, this little thing that I'm doing, it's not that important, or it's not reaching a whole lot. Well, that's not our responsibility.
Right.
You know, God is the one who gives the increase.
Yeah.
Paul said, I watered. I mean, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. Okay, well, you know, how many of us would be Christians today if Apollos hadn't done his job?
There you go.
You know, so, you know, we look at things backwards, and we want to look at the fruit before we plant the seed, and it doesn't work that way.
Would you believe this? Now, I'm 63 years old. Wow, I'm going on 64 here in the next couple months. But ever since I was 10, probably, I remember Billy Graham being on TV. And would you believe, I talked to somebody the other day, and I mentioned the word Billy Graham, and they had no clue who he was. None.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it just knocked me out, because who hasn't heard of Billy Graham? And then you get to thinking, okay, so if they don't know about Billy Graham, they must not know a whole lot about Christianity or whatever, and so there's an opportunity, to let them know who he was and what he did for everybody, because how many apples did his seed was in his seed, They were like wildflower,
But the thing is Billy is almost 100 if he isn't 100.
He'd be 97 in November.
He hasn't been actively preaching. 97 of November, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Bev Shea hit 100. But see, it's been 25 years since he was, holding any campaigns.
Right.
And so, yeah, there aren't as many that are as well known to him. It's interesting that somebody was saying a while back that Barack Obama is the first president in over 50 years that hasn't consulted with Billy Graham.
Oh, really?
And that's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
But Brother Graham is up there in years. He's not actively doing stuff anymore, and hasn't for a number of years. He's done some writing, but he's not able to be out preaching. He's not able to be doing stuff.
Yeah, his son.
And the last time I heard him, he was preaching from a chair. So.
Yeah, the last time I heard him, he got halfway through or partway through, and he had to sit down, and his son Franklin finished it for him. But
yeah.
Of course, Franklin is going about things a little different than what Billy did, and that's going to be a change for people that knows Billy Graham. It's going to be a change to them to get used to the way Franklin's doing things now. But he says that Billy, he's still good and he's still healthy. He's just old, and said he doesn't talk much. He just kind of sits at the window in his chair and gazes out, where it's at. I don't know where they live, but I mean the scenery's gorgeous. And but
Black Mountain, North Carolina, and it is some beautiful country.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he's good. We're gonna miss him. Of course, we might not make it to miss him. We might go before he does, the way things are going. We've been on here like about an hour and a half. I'm going to go ahead and kind of close things down. I don't know how long people want to listen to a bunch of us just talking here, but I mean, it's been good. I think all the conversation has been wonderful, and I want to thank both of you for being on here together and not starting no cat quarrels. And everybody agreed with everybody. When everybody agrees with everybody, it runs so much smoother. You got Jerry on one side, you got Lynn on the other, and they're both completely different on their views, but yet they all are on the same path. And so I guess
yes.
I just want to say it's been a real pleasure letting you both be on here together, and I hope we can do it again sometime. And if either of you, run across someone that you think would be interested in being on a podcast like this, let them know who I am, where I am, and they can get a hold of me.
I would say that Lynn and I are in agreement on things. We just see things from different viewpoints,
right,
from different angles and different experience.
Yeah,
we got the same view.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
the same vision, just different angles. And I appreciate what I've seen and learned from Brother Lynn just in the short time I've gotten to know him, and I'm excited about what God's doing with him.
He's one of those easy life kind of guys.
I didn't mean to hog the time today.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to hog the time today. You get me talking, it's hard to shut me up. So.
Like I said, a good argument.
Oh, no.
A good talker. Anyway, I thank you both.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll look out for it.
All right, you guys. Hey, God bless you both. Have a wonderful weekend. And this is Reverend James on U-Talk. Yeah. U-Talk podcast on Spreaker.com. And we'll send you guys a copy of it as soon as I get it out there. And so until next time, y'all be good. So see ya.